What's up guys, welcome to this review of Star Wars The High Republic Light of the Jedi by Soule. Here, an incident has occurred in hyperspace. We are a few hundred years, maybe even more, before the events of the film trilogy, by the way. So this incident occurs in hyperspace, causing a big catastrophe in the Soule system. The Jedi naturally come along to sort things out. Was it an accident? Was it on purpose? What even is it exactly? That's all answered in this book. So let me get straight off with my opinion on what I thought of this book. This book's great. I think this is one of the best Star Wars books in many years. It might even be one of my favourite books of all time, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself there. Maybe I'll look back in a few months or years and think, you know what, it's not quite up there, but right now I love this book. I think it's great. It's very energetic, very fast-paced, very focused and very on point. It's worth noting that Soule, the writer, probably best known for writing comic books, and it shows. When you read this book, you can tell that he's written comic books before, because in comic books, if you don't know, you've only got so many pages, so many frames to actually tell your story in. So you've got to get straight to the point. You've got to limit yourself with what you can do. And that's what happens with this book. He really narrows down on what makes these characters tick, what they look like, what they're feeling, what they're saying, what they're doing. And it just gets straight to the point, it's really focused. You get enough information there about all the characters, the environments, everything you need to set the mood and tone and picture here. And it's great, it makes for a very fun read. And in addition to that, it means that nothing here feels like it's unnecessary, nothing here drags things out. But of course, this is also the first book in the new High Republic era, the new, I don't even know what you want to call it, new form of Star Wars that they're exploring in Lucasfilm. In that new time period, new characters, new locations, some new characters. And it's a big task, a really big task for Soule to kickstart this off. Now, of course, he's not the only author or writer involved in all this. They actually all got together and planned this out thoroughly, I imagine. He's just the one that kickstarting it. So it's worth saying now that this really does feel like just the start of things. It really does feel like we're just scratching the surface of the story and the characters. But I do think it's a great way to start things off. It not only sets up these new locations, characters, and so on and so forth, it establishes its own worlds, its own systems and way things work and so on. So for example, it really goes into explain how the Republic works, what the Chancellor actually does for a living, what their goal is and so on, how they branch out and reach to other like planets and civilizations and stuff. It has little touching moments like this which just expand on the franchise and the galaxy as it is and makes it feel like a real lived-in world. And you might be thinking several hundred years before the film franchise. Well, that means it's got nothing to do with the film franchise. Yes and no. The story doesn't impact the film franchise at all. It very much is its own thing. You can read this without ever looking at the film franchise. You can also never read this and it won't impact the franchise at all. But for fans of the films, there are little tiny things here and there which, when you really think about it, do add to the film franchise, particularly the sequel trilogy. And I can't say too much without going into spoilers. I'll touch on that again later on, if I remember. So you can split this book into three thirds, basically. The first third is all about that inciting incident, the big catastrophe that's going on. It's very exciting, very fast-paced. Every chapter introduces a new character point of view, showing just how widespread this thing is. And it's all like basically one extended, thrilling action scene. And it's a great way to start things off. Although it does, I think, give unrealistic expectations for the rest of the book. Because once that first third's done, things do slow down a little bit. In that it turns into an investigation about that. How did it happen? What happened? What can we do about it? That's what the main narrative is about. And then the final third is all about the resolution of that, and again, without going into spoilers, things pick up again in certain regards. And I think the pacing is actually quite good. Yes, things are very fast to begin with, then they slow down a little bit, but I think it makes sense. And it's not to say that the middle's boring, it's definitely not boring at all. It's just, it's different. But the book's full of good action scenes, good suspense, good twists, One of the things that I think is really impressive is that the action scenes themselves are coherent. A lot of book writers and just writers in general seem to struggle with action scenes, with going maybe too much detail or too little detail. Maybe they're too abstract and you can't quite picture what's going on, but you got some sort of idea. This one, I think maybe because he is a comic book writer, because he does know how to get right down to the point of things, he does a great job of conveying the action in here. So I never felt like I was just picturing part of the action. I always felt like I knew exactly what was happening, and that's great. But the way in which this opens up the Star Wars franchise for a ton of possibilities, the way in which it explores the civilizations, the way things work, like I've already touched on some of this stuff, like how the Republic works, how the Chancellor works, what their job is, how they reach out, what the whole system, the way things operate in this world is fascinating, it's interesting, it makes sense for the Star Wars lore, but it reminds me of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Obviously, that's set even further in the past. But when that video game came out, it done the same thing. It opened things up and opened new possibilities. And that's great for Star Wars. That's what Star Wars is all about. Opening up your world of imagination, basically. And that's what this book did. And I think that's one of the reasons I like this book so much, is that it was something familiar, but it was familiar in a new, fantastic way. Like, one of the more nebulous ideas in Star Wars is that of hyperspace. It's not a spoiler to say that this book really focuses in on hyperspace. It doesn't necessarily say this is what hyperspace is, this is how hyperspace works, but it gives you a good idea of what hyperspace is and a good idea of how it works. So that's a great thing. That's one of the things that I think this book does really well. It takes a complicated idea and makes it simpler. It doesn't necessarily make it like basic and bare bones, like, right, this is what it is, but it gives you a better idea of it. And that's great, and it does that across the entire book with certain elements like that. But let's talk about the characters, because the characters are all brand new. We have new characters, new Jedi, new Republic soldiers, new villains, and all that stuff. Like the story, I feel like this is just the starting point for the characters. This is them just scratching the surface. Because the story is so fast, because he does only have so many pages, so much time to establish everything without dragging things out, the characters are likable, and we get enough information about them to get an idea of what they look like, what they like and don't like, what their personalities are, and a little bit about their backstory here and there. But it does feel like there's still a lot to learn about them. It does feel like there's still a lot of depth to explore with them, and I'm sure we're going to see more of that in future books and comic books and so on and so forth. So again, a great start for the characters, but you're not going to get the most detailed and depth-filled characters in this book right from the word go. In contrast to that though, we have the villains. The villains are, I think, the biggest weakness of this book. I'm not necessarily saying the villains are bad, because they're not. It's just the villains are the most underdeveloped characters in this book, and they're also the most stereotypical characters in this book. They are marauders, they are criminals, they do things because they want to do things. They do bad things because they want to reap the benefits. That's basically all there is to it. One of the villains does have a bit more going on, and again, scratching the surface. I'm sure we'll find out a little bit more going into the future, but right now the villains do feel a bit bare bones and basic, but they do the job they need to do in this book. They establish themselves as the villains. They come in and they are an imposing threat for the Jedi in certain elements. It's also worth saying that there are a lot of characters in this book. I mentioned earlier how the first third of the book, each chapter is told from a different point of view, and that means that for the first 6 chapters, you're constantly shifting perspective, constantly being introduced to new characters. There's a lot of characters here. It's hard to keep track of some of them. Eventually, I did get the hang of it. I did figure out who each of them were, but some readers aren't going to be able to do that. The main ones I think we will remember and will stand out, but there's be ones like, oh, he has a scientist who was last in a few chapters back. It's like, right. I remember the name, but I don't remember what you look like. And it's like, oh, here's a senator. What does that person look like again? I can't remember. There's a lot of that stuff going on. Luckily with some of these characters, they've actually done concept art for them and posted them online and so on. So if you're having trouble realizing what these characters look like, chances are there's an image of them online already. Someone's drew the image. And also because they're sharing this across different forms of media, in that there's some of these characters going to be in comic books and so on, there is a very distinct, this is what this character looks like, this is what this character does, and so that's great in that you can just go out of the book, look this stuff up, and it'll help you out. But because there are so many characters, there is an issue of who is the main character. I don't know. I don't think you can firmly say this person is the main character. There's definitely a main villain, but we constantly shift perspectives on the main characters in this book, and that not one of them stands out as the definitive main character, the one leading the narrative. There is an argument that Ava Chris is the main character. This is the new Jedi character who's got a unique connection to the Force. She sees the Force as music, and she can empathize with people. She can understand what people are feeling, what people are saying. She can, almost like in a telepathic sense. And it's cool and it's interesting. She's also the main character on the cover of the book as well. But you're also going to see certain names pop up here and there because this is a few hundred years before the Phantom Menace. Well, there are characters in the Star Wars film franchise who are multiples of hundreds of years old. So there are certain names, certain Jedi that are mentioned, certain characters that pop up, and even certain ancestors that pop up by name that will be like, oh, I know that name, oh, I know that character. But here they are in a new, I'm not going to say an interesting way, but it's there. There are references to characters from the film franchise that will, in one regard, does explain a certain element of the sequel trilogy. I'll get into that into spoilers though. But Charles Soule, the writer, he does a good job of making all the characters believable, makes them all likable. Even the villains have like a certain element of them that's likable, which is great. So you can empathize with some of them, you understand why they're doing everything that they do. Every character does feel like they're important and relevant at a certain point, which is great. It feels like it makes it very realistic in that regard. It doesn't feel like the characters are molding the story in unrealistic and unbelievable ways. So a lot of stories will be like everything revolves around this main character. It's like, right, how much can this actually happen? Well, that's not happening here because there are so many characters. So that's my review of Star Wars Light of the Jedi. And I think it's great. I think you definitely have to pick this up if you're a Star Wars fan, even if it's just out of sheer curiosity of what this new High Republic era is going to be. We are going to be getting a High Republic TV show in the future as well. So it is going to be outside of books and comic books and so on, moving into the future. I think there's a lot of potential here, and this is a really, really good start. It is just scratching the surface though, and it is just the start. I am going to go into a couple of spoiler points in just a couple of seconds after I tell you to subscribe to my channel before you leave. And of course, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @the_GrantBurton if you want. I also have a video game channel you can check out called Games with Grant if you just want video game content from me. But if you are leaving now, I totally understand. Read the book first, then come back and touch on these spoiler points with me. It's just a couple of little things. But you've been warned, full spoilers. So the Nihil. The Nihil are the main villains in here. I said they are marauders, they are crooks and gangsters, they're doing bad things for the benefits of it, to get the money and the finance and so on. They do feel a bit stereotypical. It's also the fact that they do feel a bit limited. They don't often feel like a threat to the Jedi. In fact, there are certain moments in here where they are like, oh god, we're dealing with Jedi here, we're way out of our depth here. And so it makes me wonder, how are they going to go forward and make the Nihil a threat? How are they going to make these the big bad of this franchise? And I feel like there should be more to it. I feel like there maybe should be a shadowy figure behind them that's directing them or something, but maybe that's too similar to other Star Wars material. But again, they established the main villain, Martian Ro, by the end of this book, and he has a lightsaber. It's okay. Does he know how to use it? Is he going to be using it? Does he have the Force? It doesn't look like it does. So I think they do need to work on the villains. I think they do need to establish them as a big threat. They do need to make it worthwhile for all of these Jedi to be wanting to take down the Nihil. The bottom line is that this group of the Nihil, at this point, they feel a little small scale to be the main villains of this new time period. So this book explores hyperspace, and it links hyperspace with a tribe called Santeca. So if you know your Star Wars history, Lor San Tekka was a character in Star Wars The Force Awakens. He's the one that had the map to Luke Skywalker. So it doesn't explain how he got that map, it doesn't explain a lot of that stuff, but it does show that he's got a history of hyperspace, he's got a history of knowing how hyperspace works, he's got all this backstory now, and you can easily make that connection now to figure out how he got that. It sounds like maybe Lor San Tekka went back home and figured it out. He knows this stuff already. So that's cool. It also explores hyperspace as a thing. So one of the things in The Rise of Skywalker is hyperspace jumping. Quick hyperspace jumps throughout the galaxy to different locations. Here it does something similar in that it's quick hyperspace jumps, but you're not going too far ahead. So it's like doof, 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 to the point where they're actually flying into other ships and so on. It really does a good job of exploring hyperspace. It does a good job of hinting at certain things and establishing certain things for the future of the film franchise. So that's a really cool thing. I also want to praise the final battle. The final battle is the Nihil versus the Republic, and they really pull out all the stops here and really do a good job of explaining what's going on. How the Nihil are going, shooting off their escape pods filled with bombs, how they're dumping off like this waste material, which is then polluting the atmosphere and so on. Well, not the atmosphere because they're in space, but you get what I mean. There's a lot going on in this battle, and I think it really does a good job of adding to the tension of the scene and adding to the action where it isn't just them shooting at each other. There's also dramatic moments in here in that one of the characters is simply trying to escape, and then there's a twist involved as well, which I thought was really good in that there's a betrayal, and it really adds to the drama and the tension of the scene. But yeah, that's all the spoilers I want to talk about with this book. It's a great book. I do recommend you go and read it if you're a Star Wars fan. But yeah, until next time, thanks for watching.